All right, let's look at a few news stories. This one is interesting, and I certainly haven't heard it reported elsewhere. Section 702 is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Every Congress has passed it. Its renewal of many years. It started, I think, with the Patriot Act. It lets the government spy on foreign citizens, and it can spy on things like telephone conversations between American citizens and foreign citizens. So some American data gets caught up in it, which they use in a highly questionable way. That almost certainly goes around the Fourth Amendment. But anyway, it usually gets approved. But the problem is Trump feels like the FBI spied on him during his 2016 campaign and made a big deal about it. So he put out a message on his Truth Social, you have to kill FISA. So the Republicans, of course, killed FISA for a while, but then they found out that what he's complaining about is not what this was about at all. And they rushed through an approval of FISA, getting it approved by approving it for only 2 years instead of the customary 5 years. But there were changes to it which were not noticed by the people voting on it. And so what Ron Wyden, who's very good on privacy issues, says is this is going to force a huge range of companies and individuals to spy for the government. What it says is it used to only apply to electronic communication services, which covered traditional phone, email, and internet companies, but it's been revised to force any other service provider who has access to equipment that is being or may be used to transmit or store wire or electronic communications to hand over those communications. And what that means, apparently, is that anyone with access to a server, a wire, a cable box, a Wi-Fi router, a phone or computer, every office building in America would be required to intercept traffic, spy on it, and hand it over to the government. And so we'll see. We'll see what comes of all this. Of course, one thing about it is, I think another part of this is when the government demands that data, they can tell you that you can't tell anybody. So we don't know how much it's being used, and we may not find out what it's going to do. But anyway, it has passed, so that's apparently going to be the law of the land for a while, at least 2 years. A Cisco Duo got breached, but I thought it was only 2 accounts. Let's see. No, that's right. They managed to compromise SMS credentials. A lot of people, when they go to two-factor authentication, they use a Cisco Duo. It's a real popular provider. And anyway, the threat actor downloaded message logs that were sent to people through the month of March. They did contain information as well as other metadata, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen, except people might phish them. Anyway, a friend of mine, sent me this. This Edward Zitron guy is one of these people that's really angry about the decay of the internet, like Cory Doctorow. In fact, he mentions in here Cory Doctorow's enshittification theory, pointing out how companies like Google once provided a very good product for free, and then they corrupted it more and more with ads to where the end user has their screen flooded with ads, and then they extorted their people who are paying them to pay more and more targeted ads in more and more deceptive ways until they are providing bad service to the end users and bad service to the advertisers. And he said this is the natural degradation of the internet. And he also thinks that AI is going to make everything 10 times worse by gobbling up too much power and stuff. So it's worth seeing these. These are your Cassandra Luddite stories that come out saying we should stop progress because there's a bad side to it. And it's a legitimate thing to say. I mean, I'm not very interested. I'm on the other side. I'm trying to make more technology and get my students jobs in technology and stuff. So I'm not very interested in stopping or slowing it down. But it is a position that he can state. My theory is the opposite. I think you should go ahead and make more of this stuff, and you should secure it. So I think Congress with antitrust can do something about the abuses like what Google's been doing of the customers and their advertisers by breaking up the big tech companies. And I think you can make AI much more efficient with power. There have been research articles recently that show they can do the same job with 30 times less power. So anyway, that's the other alternative, and I think mine is certainly the more popular position in Silicon Valley. I was amazed by this. I was a physicist long ago. I went to grad school, and I went away from nuclear particle physics because I felt like it was pretty hard to understand and baffling, and I wasn't very interested in this really abstract stuff. And one of the things that disgusted me was the strong force. Quarks are what compose protons and neutrons, and what they say is the strong force is very strong, and it gets stronger the more you pull particles apart, instead of weaker like gravity, and therefore you can never isolate a quark. And this, at that time, they said they weren't even sure quarks existed, and that sounded really bogus. And they've actually made some progress on this, because the explanations that I learned for this in, I guess must have been the 80s, were really lame, and one of the many reasons why I said I'm not going to go into particle physics. This stuff sounds like garbage. So they have a graph of how they thought this force works. Yeah, so here's a normal forces like electromagnetism. The further away you go, the weaker it gets, like gravity. But the strong force gets stronger when you move away, which is pretty hard to understand, although a spring would do that. The more you pull on a spring, the stronger it gets. And then the theory was that it can only reach a certain distance, and then it just goes off to infinity. So you can never get quarks apart, and they can only move to a certain distance apart, and then the force becomes infinite, holding them together. This was the theory, but in fact, they've now got particle collisions able to measure this, and here's what it does. It rises, and then it slows down to pretty much reach a plateau here and stop getting bigger with distance. And they have a new theory to explain this. So they're finally, for the first time ever, having some degree of an explanation for how the strong force works. So that's a significant progress to understand what's going on in nuclei, which has been pretty much a mystery up until a few years ago. This is a very interesting podcast by David Sanger, who's the national security correspondent for the New York Times, and he's talking about the new Cold Wars he thinks we're entering, and with China and Russia. And I was very interested to hear his explanation of why China is interfering with American elections. And what he said was, China has the choice between Trump and Biden, and they figure Trump is probably much more malleable because Trump doesn't have any principles. All they would have to do is offer him like a trade deal, and he would let them take Taiwan, just like he'll let Russia take Ukraine, because Trump doesn't care what happens to the rest of the world. He doesn't think there's any point getting involved in a war. He doesn't want to give anybody arms or weapons or anything. He just wants to hide in America, be isolated, and make trade deals to make money. So if China was to let him build a golf course or something somewhere in China, he'd probably just let them take Taiwan. And I think that's probably right. Before I didn't understand. He certainly talks a lot about how much he hates China and blames China for COVID and everything. So my thought is they wouldn't want Trump back. But that's probably the answer, I think. And he points out that what they're doing is Volt Typhoon is their attack against us. They're preparing to use cyber attacks to shut down our power and water in order to inhibit our ability to send military targets to Taiwan. And he claimed that they are in fact targeting the electricity and power near our military stations to specifically prevent that. So there's a lot of military propaganda. I don't know how to take it, but it's interesting to hear an analysis from a national security expert of what's going on. He says we're entering a new Cold War era, like the 70s and 80s, where we're going to not have a shooting war, but we're going to have increasing hostile, nasty things back and forth, border skirmishes and hacking between the U.S. and China and Russia. And of course, another thing which I think is absolutely correct, Richard Nixon was very intelligent, and in the 70s he prevented China and Russia from allying. He arranged to keep them divided from each other, which is definitely to the benefit of America. And in recent years, we have totally failed to do that. And now China and Russia are very closely allied, and that is a very bad thing for America. But I think that ship has sailed. That's why he says we're going to end up in Cold Wars. So they're going to have a Federal Trade Commission investigation of the casino hack of MGM. I don't quite understand why, but they're suing to stop the investigation. They say it deprives them of due process rights and such. I don't quite understand why the Federal Trade Commission is investigating it anyway. And they haven't explained it. Anyway, so we'll see. They're trying to prevent that. Apparently they think that they did something wrong and abused their customers in some way, which is possible. And so here's the Chinese propaganda. So it's the Chinese propaganda. Global Times is a Chinese propaganda outfit. So they claim there is no Volt Typhoon. It's a collusion among U.S. politicians to cheat, funding, and defame China. So this is saying that we did it to ourselves and then to blame it on China, which doesn't seem very likely, but it is their position. And students asked me last night, I was talking about Telegram, the Telegram Instant Messenger, and they were surprised to hear it's not very well encrypted. So I have some articles here, I put them on my news links, talking about whether Telegram is safe and explaining the Telegram encrypts your stuff, but it does have the key, so it could decrypt it, and your group chats, which are mostly what people use it for, are not encrypted. So that's the point. They say, Telegram is a lot less safe from a mathematical point of view than Signal and WhatsApp, and it's certainly a much poorer idea for Americans to use it because it's a Russian product. You're sending your data to Russia, which is very hard to believe you want to do that right now when we're practically at war with Russia. So it'd be wiser to use WhatsApp or Signal, which are encrypted and American. Anyway, let me stop this.